In the unforgiving streets of Seattle, a story of destiny is about to unfold. For 15 years, Michael Parker has been known only as the car whisperer among the homeless, a man who can fix any engine but couldn't repair his own shattered life. What the world doesn't know is that he was once a brilliant mechanical engineer whose innovations in engine efficiency are still used in workshops across America. When a classic 1985 Toyota Supra breaks down in front of him, he has no idea he's about to help Sarah Mitchell, the world's most secretive investment mogul, who also happens to be his first love from 20 years ago. What follows is a tale of how two souls, separated by time and circumstance, discover that sometimes life's greatest repairs aren't made with tools, but with the heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled thick through downtown Seattle streets, wrapping the city in a grey embrace that matched Michael Parker's mood. From his usual corner near Pioneer Square, he watched the steady stream of morning commuters, his weathered hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee someone had kindly offered him. The leather wallet in his pocket, his last possession from his former life, pressed against his thigh, a constant reminder of who he used to be. The sound caught his attention first. Among the usual morning traffic symphony, a distinctive mechanical whine pierced through, the unmistakable voice of a classic Toyota Supra in distress. His head turned automatically toward the sound, years of engineering instinct kicking in before conscious thought. The cream-colored 1985 Supra was struggling, its straight-six engine crying out in a way that made Michael's fingers twitch with diagnostic certainty. The car limped to a stop near his corner, steam wisping from under the hood in the cool morning air. Through the tinted windows, he could make out a female silhouette, phone pressed to ear. Even from this distance, her frustration was evident in her rigid posture. "No, this is the third mechanic this month," her voice carried as she stepped out, phone still to her ear. "They all say different things, but none of them can—" She paused, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Yes, I know it's a classic car. That's precisely why I don't trust just anyone with it." Michael watched as she paced beside the vehicle, her elegant coat and boots marking her as someone from a different world than his current reality. Yet there was something in the way she moved, something achingly familiar that he couldn't quite place. He found himself counting the probable causes of the Supra's distress, his mind automatically building a diagnostic tree based on the sounds he'd heard. The woman ended her call and pulled out a small, worn logbook from the glove compartment. The kind of maintenance record serious car enthusiasts kept. Michael recognized the type. He'd kept one himself, back when he had a car to maintain. She flipped through it with the expertise of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for, not the casual confusion of an owner who kept records merely out of obligation. 3 other mechanics had failed to diagnose the problem. Michael could tell from the engine's sound exactly what was wrong, a specific quirk of the 7MGE engine that he'd written a paper about during his engineering days. The solution was elegant, requiring precision rather than parts replacement, but few mechanics today would recognize it. He debated with himself, watching as she made another call. His expertise screamed to help, but experience had taught him harsh lessons about offering assistance where it wasn't wanted. Too many times his appearance had overshadowed his knowledge, his current situation masking his capabilities. The maintenance logbook caught his eye again. From his position, he could see that it was the original Toyota branded, with entries dating back to 1985. Someone had cared for this car, meticulously, for decades. That kind of dedication deserved respect, deserved someone who understood not just the mechanics, but the soul of the machine. Before he could second-guess himself, the distinctive sound of the engine's irregular idle made his decision for him. Some things were simply wrong to ignore, especially when you knew exactly how to make them right. Michael approached the Supra with measured steps, his expertise warring with his self-consciousness. The woman was still focused on her phone, scanning what appeared to be a list of local mechanics. Up close, the car was even more impressive. Barely. A hint of rust, original paint maintained with obvious care, and period-correct details that spoke of an owner who understood authenticity. "Excuse me," he said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. "I couldn't help but notice the timing in your engine's idle is off. It's a common issue with the 7MGE, especially when the head gasket work hasn't been adjusted for the thermal expansion coefficient." She turned, startled but not fearful, her eyes meeting his with an evaluating gaze. For a split second, something flickered across her face, a ghost of recognition quickly dismissed. Michael felt it too, a strange familiarity he couldn't place, like a word caught on the tip of his tongue. "You know these engines?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of both skepticism and hope. She was younger than he'd initially thought, probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style that somehow seemed at odds with her expensive clothing. "I used to—" Michael hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "I specialized in Toyota's inline-six engines, particularly the thermal dynamics of the 7M series. There's a specific pattern to how they fail that most modern mechanics miss." She studied him for a long moment, her hand unconsciously moving to her wallet where, unknown to Michael, she kept an old photo booth strip hidden behind her credit cards. Something about his voice, the precise way he described the engine's mechanics, tugged at old memories she'd carefully filed away. "I've had 3 mechanics look at it," she said finally. Each one suggested replacing different parts, but none of their explanations felt right. She paused, then gestured to the car. "Would you mind taking a closer look?" Michael nodded, already moving toward the hood with the practiced ease of someone returning to familiar territory. As he reached for the hood release, his fingertips recognized the slight wear on the chrome handle, exactly where it should be after decades of careful use. "You've maintained this since new?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the logbook he'd spotted earlier. "It was my first car," she replied, then caught herself amending quickly. I bought it from the original owner. Everything's documented in the maintenance log." The hood opened with a smooth motion that spoke of regular maintenance. Michael's practiced eye took in the engine bay. Spotless, organized, with modifications so subtle they'd be easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. Factory specs improved upon rather than replaced, each change documented in that meticulous logbook. As he leaned in to examine the head gasket area, his sleeve rode up, revealing a thin scar on his forearm. The woman's sharp intake of breath was almost imperceptible, but it made him glance up. She was staring at his arm with an odd expression, but quickly looked away when their eyes met. "The sound," she said, clearly trying to move past the moment. "It started about 3 weeks ago, at first just on cold mornings, but now it's constant and gets worse when the engine's hot," Michael finished. He straightened up, unconsciously falling into the teaching tone he'd used decades ago. "The interesting thing about these engines is how the head gasket interacts with the block under thermal stress. Most people assume it's a simple sealing issue, but it's actually—" He trailed off, noticing her intense focus on his explanation. There was something about the way she followed his technical description, anticipating the engineering principles before he stated them. It reminded him of someone from long ago, but that thought was too painful to pursue. Instead, he focused on the engine, on the familiar dance of diagnosis and solution that had once been his life's work. Behind him, Sarah Mitchell, though he didn't yet know her name, watched his capable hands move over the engine with a recognition that went far, deeper than mere mechanical appreciation. Michael knelt beside the Supra, reaching for his carefully maintained toolkit, a patchwork collection of rescued and repaired tools he'd gathered over years on the streets. Each had its own story of discovery and restoration, much like the man himself. From a worn canvas roll, he withdrew a precision feeler gauge that still bore its original calibration sticker from his engineering days. "May I start it?" he asked, positioning himself to listen to the engine's idle pattern. At her nod, he reached through the driver's window, turning the key with a practiced touch. The straight-six engine came to life with a sound that was both smooth and subtly wrong, like a familiar song played slightly off-key. "Listen," he said, gesturing her closer. "You hear that? It's not the timing belt most mechanics would suspect. This is the signature of thermal expansion fighting against too tight tolerances." His hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible diagrams in the air with the unconscious grace of someone explaining their life's passion. She stepped closer, head tilted in concentration. "The frequency changes with the temperature," she observed, surprising him with her precision. "It's almost like—" She stopped herself, as if remembering to be less technically astute. "Exactly," Michael replied, his excitement at finding someone who understood momentarily overwhelming his usual reserve. "The 7MGE's head gasket needs specific torque settings that account for thermal expansion. Most mechanics use modern specs, but these classics require—" He paused, remembering something. From his toolkit, he pulled out a battered original Toyota service manual, its pages dog-eared and annotated with decades of accumulated wisdom. The woman's eyes fixed on the manual with an intensity that seemed to go beyond mere mechanical interest. Michael found the relevant page, pointing to a diagram he'd annotated years ago. "See these torque specifications? They're actually wrong in the original manual. It was one of Toyota's few engineering oversights with this engine. The head bolts need to be torqued in a specific sequence," she said softly, almost to herself. "And the final values should be about 15% lower than factory specs." Her fingers traced the air above the diagram, following a pattern that made Michael's heart skip a beat. It was exactly the sequence he'd developed during his research 20 years ago. He stared at her, a forgotten memory stirring. But before he could grasp it, she stepped back, professional detachment returning to her features. "You seem to know exactly what you're doing," she said. "What do you recommend?" Michael gathered himself, focusing on the familiar refuge of technical expertise. "The head gasket doesn't need replacement. That's why the other repairs didn't hold. What it needs is proper torque settings and a specific tightening sequence. I can do it here, but I'll need a calibrated torque wrench, and about 3 hours. She checked her phone, seemingly consulting a calendar. "I have meetings all afternoon that I can't reschedule. Would you be willing to work on it while I'm gone?" There was a slight hesitation in her voice, not from distrust of his abilities, but something deeper, more personal. "Of course," Michael said, then added with a ghost of his old professional manner, "I should warn you, though, my labor rates are quite reasonable, sometimes as low as a cup of coffee." A smile flickered across her face, warming her composed features. "I think we can do better than that." She reached into her purse, withdrew a business card, and wrote a number on the back. "This is my private line. Call if you need anything, parts, tools, whatever it takes to do the job right." As she handed him the card, their fingers brushed briefly. Both pulled back slightly too quickly, as if the contact carried an unexpected charge. Michael glanced at the card. It listed only a phone number and the initials SM. No company name, no title, no address. "I trust you," she said simply, though her voice carried a weight that seemed to encompass more than just mechanical expertise. Not many people would recognize that torque sequence. She was right. It was a sequence he'd published in an obscure engineering journal 2 decades ago, read by perhaps a handful of specialists worldwide. But before he could pursue that thought, she was walking away, phone already to her ear, arranging for parts to be delivered to his precise specifications. Michael watched her go, then turned back to the Supra, his hands already reaching for his tools with newfound purpose. The engine's subtle discord called to him, a puzzle he understood how to solve. Yet as he began his work, part of his mind kept returning to the way she'd known that torque sequence, a small detail that felt significant in ways he couldn't yet understand. Sarah Mitchell sat in the back of her waiting town car, her composed exterior masking inner turmoil. Through the tinted windows, she watched the homeless mechanic begin his work on her Supra, his movements precise and familiar in a way that made her chest ache. The old Toyota manual lay open beside him, its worn pages stirring slightly in the morning breeze. "We can have the car transported to any garage of your choice, Miss Mitchell," her driver reminded her gently from the front seat. "There's no need to—" "No," she interrupted more sharply than intended. "He knows what he's doing." She softened her tone. "Did you notice how he diagnosed the problem just by listening to the engine?" The driver nodded politely, but Sarah was already lost in thought. That torque sequence. She'd only known one person who understood the thermal expansion properties of the 7MGE engine at that level. The same person who'd published that breakthrough paper in the Journal of Automotive Engineering, the one she still kept bookmarked on her tablet, though she'd never admit to rereading it. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the private browser she used for searches she didn't want tracked. 20 years of carefully maintained privacy warred with the need to know. Finally she typed, "Michael Parker, engineer, Toyota. Thermal expansion." The results were sparse, a few academic citations, a patent filing from 1998, and then nothing. It was as if he'd vanished from the professional world entirely. She found herself opening her wallet, fingers sliding behind her platinum cards to where she kept the old photo booth strip. 4 faded images of a younger version of herself with a man whose smile carried the same gentle intelligence she'd just encountered. But it couldn't be him. The Michael she'd known had been brilliant, destined for greatness. They'd been so young, so certain of their future in engineering. She'd kept track of him for a while after their paths diverged, following his early successes until the trail went cold. Through the window, she watched him work. There was something about the way he held the torque wrench, the exact angle of his concentration. A memory surfaced. A university garage, late at night, both of them bent over a similar engine, his voice excited as he explained his theories about thermal dynamics. Her phone buzzed, a message from her corporate board about the afternoon's meetings. Sarah Mitchell, the billionaire investment mogul, had responsibilities. She'd built her empire deliberately, carefully, maintaining her privacy through shell companies and intermediaries. Few people knew that the reclusive SM Industries founder was a woman. Fewer still knew her real name. And absolutely no one knew about the engineering student she'd once been, working part-time at a garage to put herself through school. She found herself reaching for the door handle, drawn by an irrational urge to go back, to look more closely at his face, to confirm or deny the impossible suggestion her heart was making. Instead, she straightened her spine, checked her schedule, and did what she'd learned to do over 2 decades of protecting her privacy. She compartmentalized. "To the office," she instructed her driver, "but first, stop at Seattle Precision. Tools. I'll need to arrange for some equipment to be delivered here." As the car pulled away, she allowed herself one last look in the side mirror. The homeless mechanic was fully absorbed in his work now, his hands moving over the engine with the kind of certainty she'd only seen once before in her life. The old Toyota manual caught her eye again, a specific edition she remembered well because she'd been there the day it was purchased, had watched as eager hands had first cracked its spine, had helped annotate its pages with discoveries and improvements. Sarah closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the leather seat. She'd built her entire empire on careful decision-making, on never acting without complete information and thorough analysis. Yet here she was, trusting her precious Supra, the one possession she'd kept from her old life, to a stranger who might not be a stranger at all. Her phone buzzed again, and Sarah Mitchell, the billionaire, returned to her world of high stakes. Investments and corporate strategy, but some small part of her remained in that street corner, watching a man whose hands spoke the language of engines with a fluency she'd never forgotten. The delivery from Seattle Precision Tools arrived within the hour. a testament to the power of Sarah Mitchell's name, even when used discreetly through intermediaries. Michael unwrapped the new torque wrench, its digital display and certification sticker reflecting the morning sun. It was the kind of tool he'd once taken for granted, back when precision instruments were part of his daily life rather than distant memories. 2 blocks away, in an unmarked black SUV, Sarah's security team maintained their vigilant watch. Through their earpieces came the steady stream of updates that accompanied their employer's everyday life. Background checks running on the homeless mechanic, surveillance feeds from nearby buildings, continuous monitoring of social media for any mention of SM Industries' elusive founder. "Status update on our street mechanic," the team leader murmured into his secure line. "Facial recognition pinging on some old academic records, engineering background, but everything goes dark. Around 2003. No criminal record, no social media presence. He's a ghost." In her office, 40 stories above Seattle's bustling streets, Sarah absently touched the ID cards in her desk drawer as she listened to the report. Each bore a different name. Each opened doors to different parts of her carefully compartmentalized life. Sarah Mitchell, Sandra Morrison, Susan Matthews. Identities crafted over years to protect her privacy, to maintain the separation between the business titan she'd become and the young engineer she'd once been. "Ma'am," her private secretary interrupted through the intercom, "the board is asking about the Chen proposal." Sarah straightened, shifting mental gears. "Tell them I'm reviewing the final projections." Her voice carried the quiet authority that had helped build her empire, but her eyes drifted to her phone, to the secure messaging app showing updates. About her Supra's repair. Back on the street, Michael worked with methodical precision, his borrowed tools feeling like old friends returned. He'd positioned himself to keep the engine between himself and the street cameras he'd noticed, a habit born from years of avoiding unwanted attention. His fingers traced the familiar patterns of the head gasket work, muscle memory unchanged. By time or circumstance, a subtle movement caught his attention. A man in business casual attire had passed by 3 times in the last hour, his path just a little too precise to be random. Another, a woman with a coffee cup that never emptied, had maintained her position at the cafe across the street. Michael recognized the pattern. He'd been watched plenty of times during his years on the street, though rarely with this level of professionalism. He continued working, his movements unhurried. The woman, his mysterious client, had resources. That much was clear from the immediate delivery of expensive tools. But there was something more, something in the way her security detail moved, in the careful dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance playing out around him. His own past had taught him about hiding, about the careful art of becoming invisible. He'd spent years erasing his digital footprint, avoiding cameras, becoming the kind of ghost that even the best background checks struggled to pin down. Now, working on this perfectly maintained Supra, he recognized the signs of someone else living behind careful screens of privacy. The engine's timing was coming into perfect alignment under his hands, each adjustment bringing it closer to its true potential. Yet with each turn of the wrench, questions multiplied. Why would someone with this kind of security detail drive a classic Supra? Why maintain such a specific car with such painstaking dedication? And why did she know that torque sequence, his torque sequence, by heart? In her office, Sarah found herself pulling up the garage security footage on her private monitor. She watched Michael work, his movements triggering cascading memories she'd thought safely buried. Her fingers touched the small safe behind her desk calendar, where she kept her most private documents. Inside, beneath corporate ownership papers and offshore account details, lay a single folder containing her original engineering degree, the last piece of paper that connected Sarah Mitchell to the person she'd been before. The intercom buzzed. Again. Another meeting, another decision needed, another piece of the empire requiring her attention. She straightened her jacket, checked her reflection in the window, perfect, polished, professional. every detail in place, just as she'd learned to maintain through years of keeping her true identity hidden. But her hand hesitated over the intercom button as she watched Michael make one final adjustment to the engine timing. In all her years of careful privacy, of multiple identities and layers of security, she'd never expected the past to find her quite like this, in the form of a homeless mechanic who moved his hands over an engine exactly like someone she'd once known. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as Michael methodically prepared for the crucial stage of the repair. He'd spread out the original Supra parts catalogue, delivered along with the tools, its yellowed pages containing secrets that modern mechanics had forgotten. Each diagram brought back memories of late nights spent studying these same engine specifications, back when understanding Toyota's engineering choices had been his life's mission. The sound of heels on concrete announced her return. Sarah approached, coffee in hand, her corporate armor slightly softened by genuine interest in the repair process. She carried a small bag from a local deli, which she set down near his tools without ceremony. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, then added with careful casualness, "How's the timing sequence coming along?" Michael gestured to the exposed engine components. The factory torque settings were off by exactly 12%, just like, he caught himself, just like the research showed. "You can see the wear pattern here." He pointed to a spot that only a trained eye would recognize. Sarah leaned in, her designer perfume mingling with the familiar sense of motor oil and metal. For a moment, they were both focused on the engine, their heads close together as he explained the subtle signs of stress in the head gasket. "The interesting thing about these engines," he continued, falling into a rhythm that felt decades old, "is how the thermal expansion affects the head bolts differently at varying temperatures. Most people assume it's linear, but it follows a logarithmic curve, especially in the upper temperature range," she finished, then immediately tried to cover her expertise with a small cough. "I mean, I've read about it." Michael's hands stilled on the torque wrench. That particular detail hadn't been in any manual or publication. It had been his own discovery, documented in a paper that only a handful of specialists would have ever read. He looked at her sharply, but she had already stepped back, attention apparently consumed by a message on her phone. "The parts store delivered everything exactly to your specifications," she said, changing the subject. "The gasket material is the high-temperature composite you requested." He nodded, returning to his work. The new gasket material was perfect. Exactly the grade and thickness he would have chosen in his engineering days. In fact, everything she'd ordered showed an uncanny understanding of what he needed, down to the specific calibration tools for the fuel injection system. As he worked, she settled onto a nearby bench, maintaining a professional distance while never taking her eyes off his process. Her security detail remained invisible but present, their subtle movements betraying their positions to Michael's street-trained awareness. "You know," she said after a long silence, "most people would have just recommended replacing the entire head assembly. It's what the last 3 mechanics suggested. Most people don't understand that sometimes preservation is better than replacement," Michael replied, his words carrying weight beyond their immediate context. "These engines were built with a kind of integrity you don't often see anymore. They just need someone who speaks their language." Sarah's breath caught slightly at his choice of words. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, her fingers unconsciously touching the worn edges of the parts catalogue. The repair progressed with a kind of choreographed precision. Michael would reach for a tool, and it would already be there, as if she anticipated his needs. When he needed reference measurements, she had the manual open to the correct page before he asked. Their movements around the engine compartment followed an intuitive dance, each instinctively knowing where the other would be. The sun continued its westward journey, casting different shadows now, highlighting different angles of the work. The street traffic ebbed and flowed around them, but they remained in their own bubble of focused collaboration. In those hours, social barriers seemed to dissolve. She wasn't a billionaire, he wasn't homeless. They were just two people who understood the poetry of precision engineering. As the final torque settings were applied, Michael found himself explaining the sequence almost as a matter of habit. The key is to work in a spiral pattern, starting from the center and moving outward. Each bolt needs to be brought up to tension gradually, in 5-degree increments. He trailed off, realizing she was mouthing the numbers along with him, her lips moving silently in perfect synchronization with his sequence. Their eyes met over the engine, and for a moment the years seemed to blur. But then her phone buzzed, again shattering the moment. "I have another meeting," she said, gathering her professional demeanor around her like a shield. Will you be here when I return?" The question seemed to carry more weight than a simple inquiry about auto repair. Michael nodded, his hands already reaching for the next phase of the work. "The engine needs time to settle between torque sequences anyway. I'll be here." She walked away, her heels clicking on the concrete, but not before he caught her taking one last look at the parts catalogue, her expression a complex mixture of recognition and uncertainty. As he returned to the precision work of rebuilding the engine, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was reassembling more than just a car. He was putting together pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. Late afternoon light slanted through the urban canyon of downtown Seattle, casting long shadows across the Supra's hood. Michael paused in his work, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of precise adjustments. His eye caught a yellowed newspaper clipping that had fallen from his toolkit, an old Engineering Times article celebrating his breakthrough research on engine thermal dynamics. He quickly tucked it away, a habit born from years of hiding his past. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. Sarah had returned, changed now into more casual attire, a simple blazer and jeans that somehow made her look more familiar. She carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to him with a gesture that sparked another flash of memory. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, then froze slightly, realizing she hadn't asked his preference. Michael accepted the cup, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. That's exactly how he'd taken his coffee 20 years ago, through countless late nights in the university engineering lab. He took a sip to cover his confusion, and the taste unlocked another cascade of memories. The same coffee shop near campus, the same order, a different lifetime. The engineering lab used to serve terrible. "Good coffee?" he found himself saying, the words escaping before he could stop them. "We always had to go to that little place on 5th, Joe's Corner," she whispered, then quickly added, I imagine there must have been a coffee shop like that. Most engineering schools have one." They stood in awkward silence, both aware of the weight of words unspoken. Sarah walked around the car, her hand trailing along its curves with familiar affection. She paused at the rear quarter panel, fingers finding a tiny imperfection in the paint, a small scratch that had been touched up decades ago. "There was a parking lot incident," she said softly, almost to herself. "Someone backed into it the first week after." She stopped abruptly, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. Michael's hands tightened on his coffee cup. He knew that scratch. He remembered the anger, the careful touch-up work, the way she had laughed it off, even as they spent an entire weekend getting the paint match perfect. But that had been a different car, a different scratch, a different lifetime. Hadn't it? He turned back to the engine, seeking refuge in the familiar world of mechanical precision. But even here, memories ambushed him, the way she anticipated. His needs, handling tools with the unconscious competence of someone who had spent countless hours around engines. The way her eyes followed his work, understanding not just what he was doing, but why. "The thermal expansion coefficient," she said suddenly, watching him adjust the final torque settings. "You wrote a paper about it, about how the factory specifications didn't account for the non-linear behavior under high-load conditions." Michael's hands stilled on the wrench, That paper had been published in an obscure journal, read by perhaps a dozen people worldwide. He had been so proud of it, had celebrated its publication with... He looked up, really looked at her for the first time. Behind the expensive clothes and carefully maintained poise, behind the years and changes, he saw something he should have, recognized immediately. The way she held herself when examining the engine, the precise angle of her head when considering a technical problem. The coffee order that hadn't changed in 20 years. Sarah, he breathed, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. But not Sarah Mitchell, the billionaire. Sarah Matthews, the brilliant engineering student who had shared his passion for engines, who had helped him develop the very theories he was using to fix this car. She stepped back, her composure cracking for just a moment before steel walls slammed back into place. "I have another meeting," she said quickly, but her voice had lost its professional edge. "I'll return in an hour to check on the progress." As she walked away, her security detail materializing to escort her, Michael noticed she had left something behind. A small, worn business card lay near his tools, different from the one she had given him earlier. This one was old, its edges softened by years. He picked it up, turning it over to find a faded Student Engineering Association logo, and below it, a name that confirmed everything. Sarah Matthews, Mechanical Engineering, Class of 2003. The card trembled in his hands as 2 decades of carefully maintained walls began to crack. The homeless mechanic and the billionaire mogul stood at the edge of a revelation that would change both their carefully constructed worlds forever. The sun was setting when Sarah returned, casting long shadows that seemed to blur the lines between past and present. She found Michael still working, his movements deliberate as he made final adjustments to the timing belt. Her old student ID card lay on top of his toolbox, a silent acknowledgement of what they both now knew. "You always did insist on checking the timing 3 times, she said quietly, no longer trying to hide the familiarity in her voice. The security detail had been dismissed to a more discreet distance, leaving them in a bubble of privacy amid the bustling street. Michael's hands stilled on the engine. "And you always counted along silently," he replied, not turning around. "Old habits die hard, don't they, Sarah Matthews?" The name hung in the air between them, heavy with 20 years of history. Sarah moved closer, her expensive heels crunching on the pavement, until she stood beside him at the engine bay. Without thinking, she reached for a wrench, her muscle memory falling into their old pattern of collaborative work. "I saw your paper when it was published," she said, adjusting a bolt with practiced ease. "The thermal expansion theory was brilliant. I always wondered why you never followed up with the secondary research we'd planned." Michael finally turned to face her, his weathered features a map of the years between them. Life took an unexpected turn. The patent dispute, the legal fees. He gestured to his worn clothes with a sad smile. "Not all brilliant theories translate to successful practice." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down the wrench. "I tried to find you," she admitted, "after I heard about the lawsuit, but you disappeared completely, even now with all my resources." She trailed off, suddenly conscious of the vast gulf between their current circumstances. "I didn't want to be found," Michael said simply. "After losing everything, it seemed easier to become invisible. The streets have their own kind of freedom." He paused, studying her face. "But you understand something about disappearing, don't you? Sarah Matthews becoming Sarah Mitchell, the mysterious billionaire." She flinched slightly at his directness. "Different kind of invisible," she murmured. "When I sold my first software patent, I realized privacy would be my most valuable asset. Each new success required another layer of separation from my past. Eventually, Sarah Matthews had to stay buried in old engineering journals and student IDs." Michael nodded toward the Supra. "Not completely buried. You kept the car. Some things you can't let go of," she said softly. "I maintained it exactly as we used to. Same specifications, same modifications." She ran her hand along the hood. Sometimes, working on it late at night, I could almost pretend we were back, in that university garage, solving the world's engineering problems, one theory at a time. The mention of their shared past broke something loose in Michael. "The night we discovered the torque sequence," he said, voice rough with memory. "You were wearing that ridiculous oil-stained MIT sweatshirt, insisting we try one more iteration. And you had coffee stains on your thesis notes," Sarah added, a genuine smile breaking through her practiced poise. "But we proved the theory worked." She gestured to the engine, "just like it's working now." Their eyes met over the engine bay, and for a moment the years seemed to collapse. They were no longer the homeless mechanic and the billionaire mogul. They were just Michael and Sarah, two engineering students who had once dreamed of revolutionizing engine design together. But reality crashed back as a distant siren wailed, making them both jump. Sarah instinctively glanced toward her security detail, while Michael's shoulders hunched in a habit born of years on the street. The contrast in their reactions was a stark reminder of how far their paths had diverged. "Why didn't you ever use the theory?" Michael asked suddenly. "With your resources, you could have revolutionized engine manufacturing." Sarah's face softened with old regret. "It was our theory, Michael, not just mine. Using it without you felt like stealing something precious." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small folder. "Besides, I did something else with it instead." Inside the folder was her old student ID, preserved as carefully as the car itself. But beneath it lay something else. A patent application from 20 years ago, filed under both their names, never executed, but never abandoned either. She had kept their shared dream alive, waiting for a moment she never thought would come. The last rays of sunlight faded from the Seattle skyline as Michael stared at the patent application, his final paycheck stub from his engineering days burning a hole in his pocket, a reminder he'd carried for 20 years of how far he'd fallen. The contrast between that past and his present felt like a physical weight. "Your security team has been running background checks on me all day," he said quietly, handing the folder back to Sarah. "I'm sure they've told you everything." Sarah's professional mask slipped entirely, revealing a vulnerability she rarely showed. "They found fragments, the lawsuit, the bankruptcy, but not why you disappeared completely." She hesitated. "Michael, what really happened?" He leaned against the Supra's fender, his hands, still bearing traces of engine grease, clasped tightly together. "The patent dispute was just the beginning. When the lawsuit hit, I thought I could fight it. Had all the documentation, all the proof that the design was original." His laugh was hollow. "What I didn't have was the money for good lawyers." Sarah stepped closer, her movement causing her security detail to shift uneasily in the shadows. "But your research was solid. I reviewed every page of your work. There's no way they could have legitimately claimed prior art. They didn't need to be legitimate. They just needed to be patient." Michael's voice carried the weight of old battles. "Every appeal drained more resources. Then came the professional blacklisting. No engineering firm would touch me with a pending patent dispute. Eventually, I couldn't even get work as a basic mechanic. Their legal team made sure of that." Sarah's hand tightened on her designer purse, where multiple phones carried messages from board members and investment partners. "I could have helped. Even back then, I had resources." "I know." Michael met her eyes. "I saw your first company make headlines. Sarah Mitchell, the software prodigy. Different name, but I'd have recognized your coding style anywhere." He smiled sadly. "By then, I'd already chosen to disappear. Pride, maybe, or shame. Easier to be a ghost than a failure." A sleek town car pulled up quietly, Sarah's driver providing a subtle reminder of her other life. She waved him off with a small gesture, buying them more time. "Look at this engine," she said suddenly, turning to the Supra. "Perfect timing, perfect torque, perfect execution. You haven't failed at anything, Michael. Life took a wrong turn, but your mind, your skills, they're still exceptional." He straightened up, professional pride momentarily overcoming his circumstances. The thermal expansion theory still works. Even after 20 years, it's the most efficient way to... He caught himself, old enthusiasm fading. But that's not my world anymore. Sarah opened her purse, pulling out her collection of ID cards, the visible proof of her own kind of disappearance. "We all hide in our own ways," she said softly. "I buried Sarah Matthews under layers of corporate identities, telling myself it was for security, for privacy. But sometimes I wonder if I was just running from who I used to be." A gentle evening breeze carried the scent of rain, promising another typical Seattle night. Michael looked at the woman before him, designer clothes and carefully maintained image wrapping the engineering student he'd once known, and felt the weight of decades of choices, both made and unmade. "Your security team is getting nervous," he observed, nodding toward the shadows where suited figures shifted with professional unease. The billionaire and the homeless man, quite a headline if anyone noticed. "Let them be nervous." Sarah's voice carried an edge of her corporate authority. "I've spent 20 years building walls to keep the world at a safe distance. Maybe..." She touched the engine, fingers finding the perfectly torqued bolts. "Maybe some walls need to come down." But even as she said it, both of them felt the weight of their separate realities. Michael's worldly possessions fit in a worn backpack stashed nearby. Sarah's empire required constant attention, evidenced by the phones that kept buzzing insistently in her purse. The gulf between them was wider than just the years that had passed. Rain began to fall, soft Seattle drops that seemed to blur the boundaries between past and present. Sarah's security team had efficiently erected a small awning over the Supra's engine bay, their movements precise and unobtrusive. Beneath it, Michael continued his work, though his hands now moved more slowly, weighted by memories and revelations. "Tell me everything," Sarah said, perched on a folding chair someone had brought her, her corporate armor softening in the intimate space. "Created by the rain and darkness. Start with the day of the lawsuit." Michael adjusted a timing belt, his movements automatic, while his mind traveled back. It was supposed to be a routine patent filing. The thermal expansion application had just been approved. There was interest from 3 major manufacturers. His hands stilled on the engine. Then came the cease and desist letter. A subsidiary of a major corporation claimed prior art from an abandoned patent application filed 6 months before mine. Sarah leaned forward, rain drumming on the awning above them. "But that's impossible. We developed that theory together. I remember every iteration, every failed test, every breakthrough." From his toolkit, Michael pulled out a folded business proposal, its creases worn deep from years of handling. Their lawyers produced documentation showing development dating, back 18 months, all of it fabricated, but by the time I could prove that, he shrugged, legal fees had already wiped out my savings. The bank was foreclosing on my apartment. No law firm would take the case on contingency, and I was unreachable, Sarah said softly, understanding dawning in her eyes. I'd just sold my first software patent. The money was beyond anything we'd imagined in school. I was so focused on protecting my privacy, on building walls. She withdrew her own artifact, the first billion-dollar contract that had established her empire, folded carefully in her wallet. I disappeared into Sarah. "Mitchell, just when you needed Sarah Matthews." "You couldn't have known," Michael said, his voice gentle. "Besides, I was too proud to reach out. Thought I could fight it alone. By the time I realized how deep their pockets were, how far they'd go to bury me," he gestured to his worn clothes. "The streets seemed like the only place left where their lawyers couldn't follow." A security team member approached discreetly, holding out a tablet. Sarah waved him off without looking. "What happened to all your research? The documentation?" "Stored on hard drives I can no longer access. Backed up in cloud accounts I had to abandon." Michael's laugh held no humor, though I kept the most important parts up here. He tapped his temple. "Some things you don't forget, no matter how far you fall." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing in the small, dry space under the awning. The subsidiary that sued you, Hammond Engineering Solutions. They were acquired by TechCore Industries in 2010. Michael looked up sharply. How did you? I make it my business to know every player in the tech industry. Her voice had taken on the edge that made corporate boards tremble. Hammond's patent portfolio was one of the main assets in the acquisition, including, I'm betting, a certain thermal expansion patent they stole from you. Sarah, Michael's voice held a warning. That's ancient history. No, she said firmly. It's theft. And unlike 20 years ago, I now have the resources to prove it. She pulled out her phone, fingers moving rapidly. With modern forensic accounting, digital archaeology, we could trace every document, every date, every fabrication, and draw attention to both of us. Michael's street-honed instincts for survival kicked in. You've spent 20 years building your privacy. I've spent the same time staying invisible. Digging this up now would be complicated, she finished. Messy, public. She met his eyes. But maybe it's time for both of us to stop hiding. The rain intensified, drumming against the awning in a rhythm that seemed to match the tension of the moment. Michael turned back to the engine, his hands finding comfort in the familiar tasks, while his mind grappled with possibilities he'd long ago stopped considering. The statute of limitations on patent disputes, he began, doesn't apply if we can prove ongoing fraud, she finished, and for a moment they were back in the university lab, completing each other's thoughts. The question is, are you ready to become visible again? The night had fully settled over Seattle, the street illuminated by the harsh glow of work lights set up by Sarah's ever-efficient security team. Michael worked steadily under their glare, his movements precise despite the exhaustion beginning to show in his shoulders. The Supra's engine was purring now, almost ready for its final adjustments. You're doing this wrong, he said suddenly, straightening up from the engine bay. Using your resources to dig up the past, it's not what I want. Sarah paused in her typing, her phone displaying a cascade of emails to corporate investigators. They stole your work, Michael, your future, everything you'd worked for, and I've made my peace with that, he interrupted, wiping his hands on a shop rag. You think I haven't had 20 years to think about revenge, to imagine ways to prove I was right? He gestured to the street around them, to the doorway where he usually slept. This life, it's not what I wanted, but it's mine. I chose it. Did you? Sarah's voice was sharp. Or did you just stop fighting? She pulled up a document on her phone, his original patent filing preserved in public records. This wasn't just theoretical work, Michael. Your insights into thermal dynamics could have revolutionized engine efficiency. Still could. Michael turned back to the engine, his refuge in times of stress. And what's your plan? Wave your billionaire. Magic wand and fix everything. Restore the brilliant engineer to his rightful place. Bitterness crept into his voice. I don't need charity, Sarah, especially not from you. Charity. She stood, corporate authority warring with personal hurt. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? He gestured to the tools around them, the expensive equipment she'd provided, without a second thought. Look at us, Sarah. You, with your empire and your security team. Me, with everything I own in a backpack. You can't just write a check and make 20 years disappear. Sarah's hands clenched around her phone. On the screen, his patent filing glowed accusingly. So that's it? Your pride won't let you accept help from someone who succeeded? Or is it because it's me, specifically? The question hung in the rain-heavy air between them. Michael's hands moved automatically over the engine, completing connections his mind could handle without conscious thought. You know what I remember. Most about our last year in school, he asked finally. Not the theories or the breakthroughs. I remember watching you solve problems, seeing that brilliant mind work. I knew then you were destined for something extraordinary. We both were, she said softly. Maybe, but you made it happen. Everything you've built, every success. You earned it. Me? He picked up a wrench, weighing it in his hand. I let one setback destroy everything. That's not something you can fix with money or influence. Sarah stepped closer into the pool of worklight. You're right. I can't fix the past. She reached into the engine bay, her manicured hands confidently adjusting a timing belt, muscle memory unchanged by time. But I'm not offering charity, Michael. I'm offering partnership. He looked at her sharply. What? Your theories still work. The evidence is right here. She patted the Supra's hood. Modern manufacturers are still struggling with the same thermal expansion issues you solved 20 years ago. The industry needs this solution now more than ever. Sarah, not as a favor, she continued, not charity, a legitimate business partnership. Your engineering brilliance, my corporate resources. She met his eyes. Equal partners, just like we used to be in the lab. Michael turned away, but not before she saw the conflict in his expression. His hands moved to the engine again, finding comfort in its predictable physics and clear solutions. Unlike human relationships, engines didn't care about pride or status, or 20 years of separation. I haven't practiced engineering in 2 decades, he said finally. The industry's changed, technology's evolved, but the fundamental problems haven't, she pressed, and neither has your understanding of them. I've watched you work on this engine all day, Michael. Your mind is as sharp as ever. He didn't respond, focused intently on a final adjustment. The Supra's engine purred in perfect harmony, a testament to skills that hadn't faded with time or circumstance. In its sound, both of them heard echoes of late nights in the university garage, of shared dreams and unclaimed possibilities. A light drizzle continued to fall as Sarah retrieved a leather portfolio from her town car. Her security team had grown increasingly anxious with each hour she spent in the street, but she dismissed their concerns with a subtle gesture. This moment was too important for interruption. I want to show you something, she said, returning to where Michael was making his final adjustments to the Supra. She opened the portfolio, revealing a draft of a new business partnership agreement, crisp and official. I had my legal team draw this up while you were working. Michael wiped his hands on a shop rag, reluctant to touch the pristine document. You work fast. I've had 20 years to think about this too. She laid out the papers on a clean section of her car's hood. This isn't an impulse, Michael. I've been tracking thermal efficiency developments for 2 decades. Nobody's come close to what we theorized back then. He scanned the document, his eyes catching on specific clauses. Equal partnership. Sarah, I have nothing to contribute except the most brilliant engineering mind I've ever known, she interrupted. The intellectual property alone is tied up in legal disputes and abandoned patents, which we can fight now with proper resources. She turned to a specific page. Look at the technical addendum. Modern manufacturing faces exactly the same challenges we were trying to solve. Electric vehicles, hybrid systems, even traditional engines, they all struggle with thermal expansion issues. Michael's hands hovered over the papers, engineer's mind already processing the possibilities despite his reservations. The application potential has actually increased, he admitted. With modern materials and manufacturing techniques, we could revolutionize engine efficiency across multiple industries. Sarah's eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm he remembered from their university days. But I need you, Michael. Not just your old research. I need your insight, your problem-solving ability. He looked up from the documents, reality crashing back. And how exactly do you plan to explain this partnership to your board? To the media? Billionaire tech mogul teams up with homeless mechanic? No, she said firmly. Pioneering engineer returns to industry with groundbreaking thermal dynamics solution. She pulled another document from the portfolio, a preliminary patent application. We start fresh. New research, new applications, new patents, but this time with the full force of SM Industries behind it. It's not that simple, Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. His hands were still, moving over the papers, engineering mind already spotting applications and improvements. Actually, it is. Sarah's voice took on the quiet authority that had built her empire. You haven't lost your skills. You proved that today with this engine. Everything else, the certificates, the credentials, the corporate polish, we can rebuild. What can't be taught is the way you think, the way you solve problems. She turned to another page in the agreement. Full research facility, complete autonomy over your work, a development team that answers to you. Her voice softened. And no hiding, no more walls between who we are and who we could be. Michael's fingers traced over the signature line. You make it sound so easy. It won't be, she admitted. There will be questions, doubters, obstacles, but this time we face them together, as equals. She pulled out a pen, not the expensive fountain pen she used for corporate signatures, but a simple mechanical pencil, like they'd used in engineering labs. Partners? The word hung between them, heavy with meaning beyond mere business arrangement. Michael looked at the Supra, its engine now running with the perfect harmony he'd restored. Then at his worn toolkit, at the street corner that had been his home, at the woman who had once shared his dreams and now offered a chance to reclaim them. I'll need time, he said finally, to think, to... He gestured vaguely at himself, at the life he'd been living. Sarah nodded, understanding the enormity of what she was asking. Take all the time you need. She closed the portfolio, but left it on the hood. The offer stands. And Michael? She met his eyes. The engineering. World has missed you. I've missed you. The night deepened around them, city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Michael held his original patent applications in trembling hands, papers he'd kept through years of homelessness, carefully preserved in a waterproof sleeve. He'd pulled them out almost without thinking when Sarah had mentioned starting fresh. These were good, he said softly, spreading the yellowed papers on the Supra's hood. Not just the thermal expansion theory, but the practical applications. Manufacturing. Processes that could have changed everything. Sarah moved closer, her designer clothes incongruous in the street setting. They're still good, Michael. The principles haven't changed, even if the technology has evolved. She pointed to a specific diagram. Look at this cooling system design. It's exactly what electric vehicle manufacturers are struggling with now. That's what scares me, he admitted, surprising them both with his honesty. Walking back into that world, I'm not the same person who wrote these papers. The industry isn't the same either. No, it's not, Sarah agreed. It's more cutthroat, more competitive, but it's also more regulated, more transparent. She gestured to her phone. Social media, investigative journalism, corporate watchdogs, it's harder to bury innovations now, harder to steal them without consequences. Michael gathered the papers, his movements careful despite his calloused hands. You know what I learned on the streets. The higher you climb, the harder the fall. I've built a life here. Not much of one, but it's safe. Predictable. Is that enough? Sarah's voice was gentle but challenging. The man I knew lived for solving impossible problems, for pushing boundaries. He didn't settle for safe. The man you knew died in a lawyer's office 20 years ago, Michael said sharply, then immediately regretted his tone. I'm sorry, it's just, you can't understand what it's like, losing everything, having to reinvent yourself from nothing. Sarah's laugh held no humor. Can't I? She leaned against the car, suddenly looking tired despite her perfect appearance. You think becoming Sarah Mitchell was easy, erasing every trace of that engineering student who worked part-time in the campus garage, building walls so high. Even old friends couldn't find me. That's different, Michael protested. You chose your transformation, built something greater. Did I? She met his eyes. Or did I just run away in a different direction? Hide behind wealth and privacy instead of anonymity and poverty. She touched the Supra's hood. This car is the only piece of Sarah Matthews I kept. The only thing I couldn't let go. Michael looked at her, really looked, and saw past the corporate armor to the woman beneath, the same brilliant mind he'd known, but tempered now by years of her own kind of survival. Why did you keep it? He asked softly. The car, I mean. You could have bought any vehicle, built any collection, because it reminded me of who I used to be, who we used to be." She ran her hand along the car's lines. Two engineering students who thought they could change the world with equations and determination. Her voice hardened. "And you know what? We were right. The theory was sound. The applications were revolutionary. The only thing that stopped us was human greed and corporate power. And now you have corporate power of your own," Michael observed. "Yes." Sarah's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had learned to wield influence. "Power I built specifically to protect innovations, to support genuine breakthroughs." She gestured to his patent papers. "Power I can use to make sure what happened to you never happens again." Michael looked down at his worn clothes, then at the gleaming tools she'd provided. "I don't know if I can make that leap, Sarah. From this life back into that world. The gap feels too wide." "Then we build a bridge," she said simply. "Step by step. No one expects you to transform overnight." She smiled slightly. "Well, no one except maybe my security team. They're having fits about this entire situation." The humor helped, easing some of the tension. Michael found himself smiling back, remembering how she'd always known how to break through his darker moods. "Your security detail does seem rather stressed about their boss spending hours with a homeless mechanic." "Former engineer," she corrected firmly. "Current mechanical genius, future industry innovator." She straightened up. "Decision made. And if you won't come to the corporate world, yet maybe the corporate world can come to you." Dawn was breaking over Seattle when Sarah returned, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small envelope. She found Michael exactly where she'd left him, making minute adjustments to the Supra's engine, perfecting what was already perfect, a habit she remembered well from their university days. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, offering him the coffee. This time, neither of them pretended the familiar order was a coincidence. Michael accepted the cup, noting the logo from their old campus coffee shop. She must have sent someone across. "A town specifically to get it. You're not playing fair," he said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Never claimed to be." She handed him the envelope. Inside were 2 business cards, freshly printed. The first bore both their names, along with the title Engineering Research Partners. The second was simpler: Michael Parker, Chief Innovation Officer, SM Industries. "A bit premature, don't you think?" he asked, but his fingers traced the embossed letters with unmistakable longing. "Actually, I think I'm about 20 years late." Sarah leaned against the Supra, her usual corporate poise softened by exhaustion and emotion. "But I'm trying to make up for lost time." Michael set the cards down next to his tools, the crisp white paper stark against the worn metal. "You remember that night in the lab, when we first cracked the thermal expansion equation?" 3 a.m., Sarah smiled. "The security guard thought we were crazy, cheering over a chalkboard full of calculations. We were going to change the world," Michael said softly. "Reform manufacturing, revolutionize engine efficiency. We still can." Sarah's voice carried the weight of conviction. "The problems haven't been solved, Michael. If anything, they're more critical now than ever. Electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, they all face the same thermal challenges we were tackling." Michael picked up the Chief Innovation Officer card again. "And you think a homeless mechanic can just walk into a corporate leadership role?" "No," Sarah said firmly, "but a brilliant engineer who spent 20 years refining his theories and practical skills. Who understands both the theoretical and hands-on aspects of mechanical engineering. He absolutely can." She gestured to the perfectly tuned Supra engine. "You haven't stopped innovating, Michael. You've just been doing it on a smaller scale." The rising sun cast long shadows across the street, painting the scene in shades of possibility. Michael looked at his reflection in the Supra's polished hood, a man worn by time and hardship, but with eyes that still held the spark of engineering passion. "I have conditions," he said finally. Sarah straightened, hope and caution warring in her expression. "Name them. I work on my own terms. No corporate politics, no board meetings, no public appearances." He held up a hand to stop her protest. At least not at first. I need time to readjust. Done. She nodded. What else? We start small. A workshop, not some gleaming corporate lab. Something hands-on, where I can put these theories into practice. He patted the Supra's engine. Real-world applications, not just computer models. I think I can do better than that, Sarah smiled. I have a facility on the outskirts of the city. It used to be a restoration garage before I bought it. Private, fully equipped, perfect for prototype development. Michael raised an eyebrow. You just happen to have a garage lying around? I may have been planning this for longer than you think. She pulled out her phone, showing him photos of a well-equipped workshop. I've been buying up properties that might be useful, just in case. In case you found me? He asked softly. In case you were ready to be found. She put the phone away. Last condition. Michael squared his shoulders. We do this right. No shortcuts, no corporate shortcuts. If our old research was stolen, we prove it. If the patents were wrongly awarded, we challenge them, but we do it through proper channels. Agreed. Sarah's smile held a hint of corporate steel. I've spent 20 years building influence specifically for battles like this. Time to put it to good use. Michael picked up the business cards, feeling their weight, not just of the paper, but of possibility, of redemption, of a future he'd thought forever lost. The street corner that had been his home suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a prison. When do we start? He asked. Sarah's answer was to hand him a key, not to a corporate office or a luxury condo, but to the workshop she'd shown him. Right now, if you're ready. The garage has a fully furnished apartment above it. Private, secure, and walking distance to 3 different coffee shops. Michael looked at his worn backpack, containing everything he owned in the world. Then at the key in his hand, the business cards on the toolbox, and the woman who had never stopped believing in their shared dreams. I'm ready. The workshop was everything Sarah had promised and more. Nestled in an industrial district just outside Seattle's core, the converted restoration garage gleamed with a perfect blend of old-world craftsmanship and cutting-edge technology. Michael stood in the entrance, his worn backpack feeling particularly light against the weight of the moment. The previous owner was a master restorer, Sarah explained, leading him through the space. I kept all the original equipment and added some upgrades. She gestured to a state-of-the-art diagnostic station that would have looked at home in any modern research facility. The keys to their new workshop felt heavy in Michael's pocket, a tangible reminder that this was real. His eyes roamed over the familiar tools of his old trade, precision instruments, testing equipment, and in the corner, a brand-new drafting table that bore an uncanny resemblance to the one they'd shared in university. You've thought of everything, he said softly, running his hand along a workbench. Not everything. Sarah opened a side door, revealing a small office. This space still needs its engineer's touch. She gestured to the empty walls, the clean desk. I thought you might want to make it your own. Michael stepped into the office, his street-honed instincts noting the exits, the security features, the clear sightlines to both the workshop and the street. Old habits died hard, but there was something else catching his eye, a single frame on the otherwise bare wall. It was his original engineering degree, rescued from some dusty university archive, professionally restored and framed. Beside it hung a blank space, clearly meant for future achievements. Too much? Sarah asked, watching his reaction carefully. No, he said after a moment. No, it's right. He turned to her. But you know this won't be easy. Coming back after so long, there will be questions, doubts. Sarah's smile held a hint of her corporate steel. Already handled. As far as the industry knows, you've spent the last 20 years doing private research and development. Your recent patent applications, which we'll file this week, will support that narrative. A convenient fiction, Michael observed. An alternate truth, she corrected. You never stopped being an engineer, Michael. The streets were just a different kind of laboratory. She led him upstairs to the apartment, which matched the workshop in its thoughtful preparation, clean, functional, with a small balcony overlooking the industrial skyline. On the kitchen counter sat a coffee maker, the exact model they'd used in their university days, along with his preferred brand of coffee. "The corporate world starts at your pace," Sarah assured him, sensing his overwhelm. "For now, focus on the engineering. The rest will follow." Michael set his backpack down, 20 years of life contained in such a small space. "And the board, your shareholders, they're okay with you partnering with a—" He gestured to his worn clothes. "With a brilliant engineer who's about to revolutionize thermal dynamics," Sarah finished. "They don't need to understand the journey, Michael. They'll understand the results." She pulled out her phone, showing him preliminary market analysis. "The industry is desperate for exactly the solutions we theorized back then. We just need to prove they work." The afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, catching on the pristine equipment, the empty office waiting to be filled, the degree on the wall that bridged past and present. Michael found himself moving toward the drafting table, muscle, memory drawing him to its familiar comfort. "We'll need to update the original equations," he said almost to himself. "Account for new materials, modern manufacturing processes." Sarah watched him slip naturally into engineer mode, a smile playing at her lips. "The computer lab is through there," she pointed. "Full simulation software, computational fluid dynamics, everything you'll need." But Michael was already reaching for a pencil, his hands moving across paper with the certainty of someone coming home. "Sometimes you need to feel the problem first," he murmured, sketches flowing from his fingers. "Let the equations speak." The transformation wasn't in his clothes, which were still worn, or in his appearance, which still bore the marks of street life. It was in his posture, his focus, the way his hands moved with purpose rather than survival. Engineer Michael Parker was awakening, one pencil stroke at a time. A week had transformed the workshop. Blueprint sketches covered the drafting table, each bearing Michael's distinctive notations, a blend of formal engineering symbols and shorthand developed during years of working without proper materials. The office walls now held thermal dynamics charts, their data reflecting 20 years of informal observation and experimentation. Sarah entered to find Michael bent over their first joint project, a blueprint that would revolutionize engine cooling systems. His clothes were new but simple, chosen for comfort and functionality rather than appearance. Some changes couldn't be rushed. "The simulation results came back," she announced, setting down 2 coffees in their familiar order. "Your modifications to the thermal flow patterns. They're showing a 15% improvement over current industry standards." Michael straightened, his eyes bright with the focus she remembered from their university days. "That's just the beginning. Look at this." He led her to a workbench where the Supra's cylinder head lay partially disassembled. "I've been thinking about our old theory from a different angle. 20 years of street-level engineering giving you new perspectives?" Sarah asked, noting how naturally he moved between theoretical calculations and hands-on demonstration. "Something like that." He pointed to specific modifications he'd made. "When you're fixing engines with limited resources, you learn to see efficiency differently. It's not just about optimal performance, it's about adaptability, resilience." Sarah leaned in, her corporate polish momentarily forgotten, as engineering curiosity took over. "You're redesigning the entire thermal management system." "Not redesigning," he corrected, reaching for a drawer and pulling out their original patent application. "Evolving it. Everything we theorized back then was right. We just needed to account for real-world variables we hadn't considered." The blueprint between them represented more than just a technical design. It was a bridge between their past and present, between theoretical brilliance and hard-won practical experience. Each notation showed where Michael's years on the street had enhanced rather than diminished his engineering insight. "The industry won't expect this," Sarah said, already calculating the impact. They're focused on incremental improvements, small gains in efficiency. This, she gestured to his design, this changes the fundamental approach. That's why it'll work, Michael said quietly. They're looking for patches and upgrades. We're offering a revolution. He turned to his computer, where simulation models showed thermal flow patterns that defied conventional wisdom. 20 years ago, we were trying to force the industry to adapt to our theory. Now we're letting real-world experience guide the theory itself. Sarah watched him work, seeing both the brilliant, young engineer she'd known and the resilient survivor he'd become. His hands moved between keyboard and tools with equal confidence, each skill enhancing the other. "When do you want to file the patent?" she asked. Michael's hands stilled. "It needs more testing, more validation. It needs to be protected," she countered gently. "The industry has changed, Michael, but corporate espionage hasn't. Once these results become public," he nodded, street-honed wariness mixing with professional understanding. "You're right, but we file under both our names this time. Equal partnership, like we agreed. Already drawn up." She pulled out the patent application, ready for their signatures. "Our legal team has ironclad protection built in. No subsidiary companies, no hidden clauses, no loopholes." Michael picked up a pen, not the expensive one she offered, but the same mechanical pencil he'd been using for his designs. Some symbols mattered. He signed with steady hands, his name flowing onto the paper with the confidence of someone reclaiming their identity. Sarah added her signature below his, then stepped back to study their creation. The blueprint seemed to glow in the workshop lights, its elegant solutions promising a future neither of them had imagined possible a week ago. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "there's a certain poetry to this. The industry that tried to destroy your career is about to be revolutionized by the very experience that resulted from that attempt." Michael smiled, his first genuine one since starting their project. "Life has a way of completing its own thermal cycles," he said, the engineer's joke falling naturally from his lips. "Everything returns to equilibrium eventually." 1 month later, the morning sun cast familiar shadows on the street corner where it all began. The Supra purred to a stop at the exact spot where it had broken down, its engine now running with a perfection that seemed to defy physics. Michael stood beside it, dressed simply but professionally, his transformation subtle but undeniable. "Feeling nostalgic?" Sarah asked, joining him on the sidewalk. She dressed down today, wearing jeans and a blazer that reminded him more of their university days than her corporate life. "Remembering," he corrected, his hand resting on the Supra's hood. "A month ago, I thought I was just fixing another car." He smiled, though I did wonder why a billionaire was driving a classic Toyota. "Some things are worth holding on to," Sarah said softly, running her fingers along the car's frame. "Even when everyone tells you to let them go." The street had changed little. Same morning traffic, same coffee shops, same hurrying pedestrians, but everything else had transformed. Behind them, a discreet security detail waited with their modern corporate vehicle. In Michael's pocket, fresh business cards carried both their names, and in the workshop across town, their revolutionary engine design was taking physical form. "The patent office called this morning," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Initial review is complete. They've never seen anything quite like our thermal management system." Michael nodded, professional pride warring with old anxieties. "Any red flags? Challenges?" "Just the opposite." She couldn't contain her smile now. "They're fast-tracking the application. Apparently, solutions to critical industrial problems get priority review." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. 20 years ago, corporate lawyers had buried their innovation. Now, the same industry was eager to embrace it. The difference wasn't just in their approach or resources, it was in the unique perspective that only their separate journeys could have created. 3 major manufacturers have already requested meetings, Sarah continued. Word got out about the efficiency improvements in preliminary testing. "Let them wait," Michael said. surprising them both with his confidence. "We do this right. Remember, perfect the prototype, document everything, build an ironclad position." His street-learned caution had evolved into professional wisdom. Sarah's phone buzzed, another corporate emergency demanding attention. But instead of answering immediately, she reached into the Supra's glove compartment and pulled out their old engineering notebook, its pages now filled with both past dreams and present innovations. "We should head back to the workshop," she said, but made no move to leave. "The new testing equipment is being delivered this morning." Michael took one last look at his old corner, at the spot where he'd spent years watching life pass by. "You know what I've learned?" he said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home." Sarah understood. Their 20-year detour, his into survival, hers into corporate isolation, had given them exactly what they needed to succeed now. His practical genius combined with her strategic power, her resources paired with his hard-won insights. "Speaking of home," she said carefully, "the apartment above the workshop, it suits you." "It does," he agreed, "though I'm thinking of adding a coffee maker to the actual workshop for those late-night engineering sessions." "Already ordered." "The same. Model from university." She paused. "I thought maybe we could break it in tonight. I have some ideas about applying our thermal management system to renewable energy storage." Michael caught the echo of countless similar conversations from their past. Late nights, fueled by coffee and inspiration, problems solved through collaboration and determination. But now they had something more: experience, resources, and the unshakable knowledge of what they could overcome together. "I'd like that," he said simply. They got back into the Supra, Sarah driving, Michael instinctively listening to the engine's perfect rhythm. As they pulled away from the corner, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The car's purr said everything about precision engineering and second chances, about dreams deferred but not abandoned, about two paths diverging only to converge again, stronger for the journey. In the workshop waiting for them, their shared future took tangible form in blueprints and prototypes. But here, in this moment, they were simply two engineers who had found their way back to what mattered most: the pure joy of solving impossible problems together.